Woman alone in a blizzard, her life slipping away with every breath. She prays for help, not knowing if anyone can hear her, but someone does. And that moment changes everything. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The blizzard had come without warning, transforming the Arizona Territory landscape into a merciless white hell. December of 1876 had proven to be one of the harshest winters the region had seen in decades, and Eleanor Hartwell found herself caught in nature's fury with nowhere to hide. Her wagon had broken an axle 3 miles back, her horse had bolted in panic when the storm intensified, and now she stumbled through knee-deep snow, her burgundy traveling dress soaked through and freezing against her skin. Eleanor was 24 years old, a schoolteacher from Boston who had journeyed west with dreams of bringing education to frontier settlements. Her father had called her foolish, her mother had wept, but Eleanor had been determined. She had secured a position at a small school in Prescott and had been traveling from Flagstaff when disaster struck. Now those dreams seemed as distant as the stars hidden behind the swirling white curtain of snow. Her fingers had long ago lost feeling. Her boots were blocks of ice and her breath came in ragged gasps that burned her lungs. The cold was a living thing, clawing at her exposed skin, seeping into her bones. Eleanor knew she was dying. She had read enough accounts of frontier life to recognize the signs of severe hypothermia. Her movements were becoming sluggish, her thoughts fuzzy and disjointed. She collapsed against a boulder, her legs simply refusing to carry her any further. The wind howled around her like a pack of wolves, and snow gathered quickly on her dark hair and shoulders. With trembling hands, she pulled her mother's silver locket from beneath her collar, pressing it to her lips. Inside were tiny portraits of her parents, their faces now a reminder of everything she would never see again. "Please," Eleanor whispered through chattering teeth, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please, God, if you can hear me through this tempest, send someone. Anyone. I don't want to die alone in this frozen wilderness." Tears froze on her cheeks as she spoke, her prayer carried away by the merciless wind. "I came here to help people, to make a difference. Please don't let it end like this." Her eyes grew heavy, and she knew that if she closed them, she might never open them again. But the exhaustion was overwhelming, pulling at her consciousness like an undertow. Just as darkness began to creep into the edges of her vision, Eleanor thought she saw a figure moving through the white chaos. At first, she assumed it was a hallucination, her dying mind conjuring phantom rescuers. But the figure drew closer, taking on solid form. Through the blinding snow emerged a man unlike any Eleanor had ever seen. He was Apache, tall and powerfully built, moving through the blizzard with a grace that defied the treacherous conditions. He wore deerskin clothing and a heavy bear fur cloak, his long black hair whipping in the wind. His face was striking with high cheekbones, intense dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the storm, and an expression of focused determination. The warrior stopped several feet away, his hand resting on the knife at his belt as he assessed her. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two people from vastly different worlds meeting in the most unlikely of circumstances. Eleanor tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She could only look up at him with pleading eyes, silently begging for mercy, for help, for life itself. The Apache warrior's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He had been hunting when the storm struck, and had been making his way back to his winter camp when something had compelled him to veer from his path. His people would say it was the spirits guiding him, and Tahatan was inclined to believe them. He had not expected to find a white woman dying in the snow, but here she was, and leaving her to freeze would be a death sentence. "Can you stand?" he asked in accented but clear English, surprising Eleanor. When she shook her head weakly, he made his decision. In one fluid motion, he removed his bear fur cloak and wrapped it around her shivering form, then lifted her into his arms, as though she weighed nothing at all. Eleanor's head fell against his chest, and she could feel the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat through his deerskin shirt. "My camp is near," Tahatan said, more to himself than to her. "Stay awake, white woman. Do not surrender to the cold." He began moving through the snow with long, purposeful strides, his body angled against the wind. Eleanor tried to obey his command, forcing her eyes to remain open, focusing on his face to anchor herself to consciousness. "What is your name?" she managed to whisper, her voice so soft he had to lean closer to hear her. "Tahatan," he replied, navigating around a cluster of snow-covered pines. "It means hawk in your language. And you?" "Eleanor," she breathed. "Eleanor Hartwell." "Eleanor," he repeated, the foreign syllables sounding musical in his deep voice. "You will live, Eleanor Hartwell. I have sworn it." There was something in his tone, a fierce protectiveness that surprised them both, as though her survival had become a sacred duty. They traveled for what felt like both an eternity and mere moments. Eleanor drifted in and out of awareness, catching glimpses of towering rock formations and twisted junipers bent under the weight of snow. Finally, they arrived at a sheltered canyon, where Tahatan had established his temporary camp. A wickiup, a traditional Apache dwelling made of wooden poles and covered with hides, stood against the canyon wall, protected from the worst of the wind. Tahatan ducked inside, carefully laying Eleanor on a bed of furs near a small fire that still burned in the center of the structure. The warmth hit her like a physical force, and she gasped, her body beginning to shake violently as circulation slowly returned to her extremities. The pain was excruciating, like 1,000 needles piercing her skin simultaneously. "This will hurt," Tahatan warned, beginning to remove her frozen boots with gentle efficiency. "But you must endure it. The cold has gripped you deeply." He worked quickly, his hands sure and practiced as he stripped away her wet clothing, replacing each sodden garment with warm, dry furs. His movements were clinical, respectful, those of a healer rather than anything inappropriate. Eleanor bit her lip to keep from crying out as feeling returned to her fingers and toes. Tahatan retrieved a water skin and heated its contents over the fire, then helped her sit up enough to take small sips of warm broth. The liquid burned her throat but sent blessed warmth spreading through her core. "You are far from your people," Tahatan observed, settling back on his heels to watch her carefully. "What brings a woman alone into the wilderness in winter?" "I am a teacher," Eleanor replied, her voice gaining strength with each sip of broth. "I was traveling to Prescott to start a position at the school there. My wagon broke down and the storm came so suddenly." She paused, looking at him with open curiosity that held no fear, despite everything she had surely been told about his people. "You speak English very well." A slight smile touched Tahatan's lips. "I lived for a time at the San Carlos Reservation. I learned your language from the missionaries, though I did not embrace their religion." His expression grew more serious. "I left the reservation 2 years ago. Their rules, their boundaries, they were chains. My spirit required freedom, so I returned to the old ways, living as my ancestors did." "Aren't you worried about the soldiers?" Eleanor asked, genuine concern in her voice. She knew that Apaches who left the reservations were hunted, considered hostile. "Always," Tahatan admitted, "but I am careful. I move with the seasons, take only what I need from the land, and avoid the settlements and the Bluecoats' forts. This is my homeland, Eleanor Hartwell. I was born in these mountains, and I will die in them, but not on reservation land, confined like a horse in a corral." Eleanor studied him in the firelight, seeing not the savage she had been warned about, but a man defending his way of life, his freedom, his very identity. There was a quiet dignity about him, a strength that went beyond the physical. His face, illuminated by the dancing flames, was beautiful in its fierce masculinity, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her recent brush with death. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life. I know you had no obligation to help me. Our people have caused yours so much pain." Tahatan was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes holding hers. "You are not responsible for the sins of others, just as I am not defined by every action of every Apache. Saw a person in need, and I acted. That is all." But even as he spoke the words, he knew there was more to it than simple compassion. Something had drawn him to her, something he could not yet name. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but inside the wickiup, a fragile warmth was building that had nothing to do with the fire. 2 souls from different worlds had collided in the snow, and neither would ever be quite the same. The storm raged for 2 more days, trapping Eleanor and Tahatan together in the wickiup. During those hours of forced proximity, an unexpected bond began to form between them. Eleanor watched as Tahatan moved with practiced ease through the routines of survival, checking and maintaining their fire, rationing their supplies, and ensuring the structural integrity of their shelter against the relentless wind and snow. On the second morning, Eleanor felt strong enough to sit up without assistance. Her body still ached, and frostbite had left her fingertips tender and discolored, but she was alive. She watched Tahatan prepare a simple breakfast of dried venison and cornmeal cakes, his movements economical and precise. "Tell me about your life before the reservation," Eleanor said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What was it like to live freely in these mountains?" Tahatan paused in his work, his expression becoming distant as he gazed into the fire. "It was everything," he began, his voice carrying a note of deep longing. "My band traveled with the seasons. In spring, we would move to the high country where the deer were plentiful, and the streams ran clear with snowmelt. Summer brought us to the valleys where we could gather wild plants and hunt antelope. In autumn, we prepared for winter, drying meat and gathering nuts. And in winter we would shelter in places like this, telling stories and making plans for the year to come." He handed her a warm cake and continued, "I was training to be a warrior, learning from my father and the other men of our band. But I was also learning the healing ways from my grandmother. She taught me which plants could cure fever, which could stop bleeding, which could ease pain. She said I had a gift for it, that the spirit spoke to me through the growing things." Eleanor ate slowly, savoring both the food and his words. "It sounds like a rich life, full of purpose and connection to the land. Why did you go to the reservation if you loved your freedom so much?" Tahatan's jaw tightened, old anger and grief flashing across his features. "In 1874, the soldiers came. They said all Apache must go to San Carlos, that it was the law of the white man's government. My father refused at first, but they threatened to hunt us down like animals, to kill anyone who resisted. My mother was sick, too weak to run, and my younger sister was only 10 summers old. My father chose to protect them, even though it meant surrendering everything we were." He stood abruptly and moved to the entrance of the wickiup, pulling back the hide covering just enough to look out at the white landscape. San Carlos was a place of death. Too many people crowded together, not enough food, not enough medicine. The agents were corrupt, selling our rations for profit while we starved. My mother died within 6 months. My father's spirit broke and he followed her within the year. My sister, Nayeli, she adapted better than I did. She learned to weave baskets to sell to the white tourists, learned to smile and be harmless. Eleanor's heart ached at the pain in his voice. She rose, wrapping one of the furs around her shoulders, and moved to stand beside him. "I'm so sorry, Tahatan. No one should have to endure such losses, such injustice." He turned to look at her, surprised by the genuine compassion in her eyes. Most white people he had encountered either feared him or looked at him with contempt, as though he were somehow less than human. But Eleanor's gaze held only empathy and understanding. "What made you leave?" she asked gently. "One morning I woke up and realized I was already dead," Tahatan said simply. "My body still breathed, but everything that made me who I was had been stripped away. I could either stay and become a ghost, or I could risk everything for the chance to truly live again, even if that life was shorter. So I left in the night, took only what I could carry, and returned to these mountains. That was 2 years ago, and despite the constant danger, despite the loneliness, I have not regretted it for a single day." "And your sister?" Eleanor asked. "Nayeli understands why I left, though she worries. I visit her when I can, sneaking onto the reservation at night. She is 16 now, grown into a strong young woman. She has found a good man there, another Apache who works as a scout for the army. It is not the life I would have chosen for her, but she seems content, and that must be enough." Eleanor reached out tentatively and placed her hand on his arm. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them, a spark of connection that went beyond simple human comfort. Tahatan looked down at her hand, small and pale against his tanned skin, and felt something shift in his chest. "You are a remarkable man, Tahatan," Eleanor said softly. "You chose honor and authenticity over safety and comfort. That takes tremendous courage." Some would say it was foolishness, he replied, but his voice had softened. And what of you, Eleanor Hartwell? What drives a woman from the safety of Boston to the dangers of the frontier? Surely there were schools in the East where you could have taught. Eleanor withdrew her hand, suddenly self-conscious, and returned to sit by the fire. I suppose I was running from a different kind of prison, she admitted. In Boston, my entire life was mapped out for me. I was expected to marry Jonathan Blackwell, a banker's son chosen by my father. I was expected to host tea parties and charity functions, to produce heirs and maintain the family's social standing. Every day felt like I was slowly suffocating under the weight of all those expectations. She pulled her knees up to her chest, resting her chin on them. I wanted to matter to Houghton, not as some man's wife or some family's ornament, but as myself. I wanted to use my education to help people, to make a real difference in the world. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Prescott, it felt like a door opening, a chance to become who I was meant to be rather than who I was expected to be. Houghton settled back down across from her, studying her face with new appreciation. So we are both fugitives in our own way, he observed, both seeking freedom from the cages our worlds tried to lock us in. I suppose we are, Eleanor agreed with a small smile. Though I confess, when I imagined my adventure in the West, I never pictured being rescued from a blizzard by an Apache warrior. And I never imagined I would save a white schoolteacher and find myself enjoying her company, Houghton said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Eleanor's breath catch. The storm finally broke on the third day, and Eleanor knew she needed to make plans to continue to Prescott. But the thought of leaving Houghton filled her with an unexpected sadness. In these few days, she had felt more seen, more understood, than she had in her entire life in Boston. This man, who should have been a stranger from an entirely different world, somehow felt like the missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. I need to get to Prescott, Eleanor said that evening as they shared another simple meal. The school is expecting me, and I cannot simply disappear. But I don't know how I'll manage it. My wagon is destroyed, my horse is gone, and I have no idea where I am in relation to the town. Houghton was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle clear on his face. Finally, he spoke. I will take you there. It is too dangerous for you to travel alone, and I know these mountains better than anyone. We will leave at first light. But won't that put you at risk? Eleanor protested. If soldiers see you near the settlement, they'll assume the worst. I couldn't bear it if helping me led to your capture or death. I will be careful, Houghton assured her. There are ways to move unseen, and I know which areas the patrols avoid. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I cannot rescue you from a blizzard only to let you die of exposure or starvation on the journey to town. My grandmother would never forgive such incomplete healing. Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and genuine. Well, we certainly can't disappoint your grandmother's spirit. They set out the next morning under clear skies, the world transformed into a glittering wonderland of white. Houghton had fashioned snowshoes for both of them from branches and leather strips, and they moved across the landscape with surprising efficiency. He carried most of their supplies on his back, insisting that Eleanor conserve her strength for the journey. As they traveled, they talked, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Eleanor told him about her love of literature, how she had devoured every book in her father's library. Houghton spoke of learning to track animals with his father, the pride he had felt the first time he brought down a deer on his own. On the second day of travel, they came across a frozen stream, and Houghton held out his hand to help Eleanor across the icy stones. When their hands clasped, neither of them pulled away immediately. They stood there on the bank of the stream, the winter sun illuminating their joined hands, and something unspoken passed between them. Eleanor, Houghton began, his voice rougher than usual. I need to tell you something. These days with you, they have been unexpected. You have awakened something in me that I thought had died at San Carlos. Hope, perhaps, or the possibility that understanding between our peoples might exist, even if only between two individuals. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. I feel it too, she whispered. This connection between us, it shouldn't be possible. We're from different worlds, different lives. But somehow, when I'm with you, I feel more myself than I ever have. You see me, Tahatan, truly see me, not just the role I'm supposed to play. If circumstances were different, Tahatan said, stepping closer to her, if you were not expected in Prescott, if I were not a hunted man, I would ask you to stay. I would build you a proper winter camp, teach you the ways of my people, show you the beauty of these mountains in every season. And if I were braver, Eleanor replied, tears gathering in her eyes, if I didn't have obligations, if I didn't fear what would happen to you if you were caught because of me, I would say yes. I would choose this, choose you, choose a life of freedom over a life of expectations. They stood in the crystalline silence, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them. Then, slowly, Tahatan reached up and cupped Eleanor's face in his hand, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I will treasure these days for the rest of my life, he said softly, no matter what comes after. Eleanor covered his hand with her own, pressing it more firmly against her cheek. As will I. They continued their journey, but something had fundamentally changed between them. Every glance carried additional weight. Every accidental touch sent electricity through their bodies. They were falling in love, impossibly and against all reason, and they both knew it. On the afternoon of the 4th day of their journey together, the settlement of Prescott came into view in the distance. Eleanor stopped walking, her heart sinking at the sight of the wooden buildings and smoke rising from chimneys. What should have filled her with relief instead filled her with dread. Reaching Prescott meant the end of her time with Tahatan, and she wasn't ready for that. She didn't know if she would ever be ready. Tahatan stood beside her, his jaw tight as he surveyed the town. We should wait until dark, he said quietly. I will bring you close enough that you can reach the settlement safely, but I cannot risk being seen. Eleanor turned to face him fully, her eyes searching his face as though trying to memorize every detail. Tahatan, I don't want to say goodbye. These days with you have changed everything. I came west seeking purpose and freedom, and I found both, but not in the way I expected. I found them with you. Eleanor. Tahatan breathed her name like a prayer, pulling her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other as the winter sun began its descent toward the horizon. Come with me, Eleanor said suddenly, pulling back to look up at him with fierce determination. Not into town, but away from here. We could go somewhere else, somewhere neither of us is running from expectations or soldiers. California, perhaps, or even further. We could start fresh, build a life together. Tahatan's expression was torn between hope and anguish. You would give up your teaching position, your chance to make the difference you spoke of? I can teach anywhere, Eleanor insisted, gripping his arms. There are children everywhere who need education, but there is only one you, Tahatan. Only one man who sees me as I truly am, who values my thoughts and my spirit as much as my ability to fulfill a role. I thought purpose meant teaching in a school, following a predetermined path, but maybe real purpose is choosing love, choosing authenticity, choosing a life built on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation. Before Tahatan could respond, the sound of horses and shouting voices carried across the snow. They both froze, then quickly moved behind a cluster of large boulders. Peering around the rocks, they saw a patrol of cavalry soldiers riding hard in their direction, and leading them was a civilian scout. They must have found tracks, Tahatan whispered urgently. Eleanor, listen to me carefully. You need to walk toward them with your hands visible. Tell them you survived the blizzard and were making your way to Prescott. Do not mention me. I won't leave you to face them alone, Eleanor protested, but Tahatan was already pressing something into her hand. It was a small carved hawk, beautiful and intricate, made from a piece of dark wood. I made this last night while you slept, he said quickly, his words rushing as the soldiers drew closer. So you would have something to remember me by. But Eleanor, if you meant what you said about choosing this life, about choosing me, then hold on to it. Wait 1 month. If after 1 month in Prescott, living the life you planned, you still want what we spoke of, take the northern road out of town just before dawn on the 1st day of February. Follow it for 3 miles until you reach a distinctive rock formation that looks like a bird taking flight. I will be there, waiting. I will wait every day for a week. If you come, we will leave together and never look back. And if I don't come, Eleanor asked, tears streaming down her face, then I will know you chose the safer path, the reasonable path, and I will wish you nothing but happiness, Tahatan said, though his voice cracked with emotion. But I will hope, Eleanor Hartwell. I will hope with everything in me that you choose us. The soldiers were nearly upon them. Tahatan kissed her then, fierce and desperate and full of promise, pouring everything he felt into that single moment of connection. Then he released her and disappeared into the landscape with the silent grace of a shadow, leaving Eleanor standing alone with the carved hawk clutched in her hand. "There! I see someone!" a soldier shouted, and within moments, Eleanor was surrounded by mounted cavalry, their rifles at the ready. "Please help me," Eleanor said, forcing her voice to shake with fear that wasn't entirely feigned. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell, the new schoolteacher. My wagon broke down in the blizzard, and I've been walking for days trying to reach Prescott." The soldiers lowered their weapons, and a young lieutenant dismounted to offer her his horse. "Miss Hartwell, we've been searching for you since your wagon was found abandoned. You're incredibly fortunate to have survived. Did you see anyone else out here? Any Indians?" Eleanor met his eyes steadily, the carved hawk hidden in her closed fist. "No one," she lied without hesitation. "I've been completely alone." They brought her into Prescott, where she was immediately surrounded by concerned townspeople. The school superintendent, Mr. Harrison, a portly man with kind eyes, personally escorted her to the boarding house where a room had been prepared for her. "You must rest, Miss Hartwell," he insisted. "The school can wait a few more days while you recover from your ordeal. It's a miracle you survived." Over the following weeks, Eleanor threw herself into her work at the school. She had 15 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, children of miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers. They were eager to learn, and under different circumstances, Eleanor would have found deep satisfaction in teaching them. She created lesson plans, organized a small library, and even started a reading club for the older students. But every night she lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house, holding the carved hawk and thinking of Tahatan. She had told herself she would give the town a fair chance, that she owed it to herself and to the position she had worked so hard to obtain. Yet as the days passed, she found her heart was not in Prescott, but out in the mountains with a man who represented everything her old life had taught her to fear, and everything her heart had learned to love. On a Friday evening in late January, Eleanor was invited to dinner at the home of Reverend and Mrs. Cooper, prominent members of the community. Over roast chicken and potatoes, Mrs. Cooper, a well-meaning woman in her 50s, broached a subject that had clearly been on her mind. "Miss Hartwell, I hope you don't think me forward, but I wanted to mention that my nephew Thomas will be arriving from Denver next month. He's a lawyer, well-educated and from a good family. I thought perhaps you might allow me to introduce you. It would be wonderful to see you settled here permanently." Eleanor felt her stomach clench. This was exactly what she had run from in Boston, only with different names and faces. She was being slotted into the role of respectable schoolteacher, who would eventually become someone's respectable wife, producing respectable children, and living a respectable life that had nothing to do with who she actually was or what she actually wanted. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Cooper," Eleanor said carefully, "but I'm not certain I'm ready to think about such things just yet." Of course," Mrs. Cooper said with a knowing smile. "But a woman in your position, well, it's something to consider. Teaching is admirable, but surely you don't want to remain alone forever." That night, Eleanor stood at her window, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. She thought about the life being offered to her here, safe and predictable and suffocating. Then she thought about Tahatan, about the freedom she felt in his presence, about conversations that challenged and inspired her, about a love that saw her as a complete person, rather than a role to be filled. The choice, she realized, had already been made. Perhaps it had been made the moment Tahatan had lifted her from the snow, or perhaps during their long talks in the wickiup, or perhaps in that devastating kiss before the soldiers arrived. But it was made, and Eleanor felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. She began making quiet preparations. She couldn't take much, only what she could carry in a small pack, but she carefully selected practical items: warm clothing, a few books, medical supplies, matches, dried food. She withdrew her savings from the bank, claiming she wanted to send money to her family. She wrote letters to her parents and to Mr. Harrison, explaining her decision, though she would not mail them until she was gone. The night before the 1st of February, Eleanor barely slept. She had told Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, that she would be leaving early to visit a student's family on their ranch outside of town. It was a thin excuse, but it would buy her time before anyone realized she wasn't coming back. At 4 in the morning, Eleanor dressed in her warmest clothes, secured her pack, and slipped out of the boarding house. The town was silent and dark, and fresh snow from the previous evening muffled her footsteps. She made her way to the northern road, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The walk was cold and challenging, but Eleanor pressed forward with determination. As the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, she saw it, the rock formation that looked remarkably like a bird taking flight, its stone wings spread against the pale morning sky. And there, standing beside it, was Tahatan. He had clearly been waiting, probably through the night, because snow had gathered on his shoulders and in his hair. When he saw her approaching, his entire face transformed with joy and relief. He ran to meet her, and they collided in an embrace that nearly knocked them both off their feet. "You came," Tahatan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor, you actually came. Did you doubt it?" Eleanor asked, laughing and crying at the same time. "Every minute of every day," he admitted, pulling back to look at her face as though confirming she was real. "I thought perhaps you would realize the madness of this choice, the comfort and security you would be abandoning. The only madness would have been staying," Eleanor said firmly. "I love you, Tahatan. I love your strength and your gentleness, your wisdom and your courage. I love the man you are, not despite our differences, but because of them. You've taught me what freedom really means, what love really means. I choose you. I choose us. I choose a life of authenticity over a life of expectations." Tahatan cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I love you, Eleanor Hartwell. You are the bravest person I have ever known. I promise to spend every day of my life honoring the choice you have made, building a life with you that celebrates both of our heritages, both of our truths." They kissed then, long and deep, sealing their commitment to each other as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. When they finally pulled apart, Tahatan took her hand. "I have been making plans," he said, leading her toward 2 horses he had waiting in a sheltered area. "We will go to California, as you suggested. I have heard of communities there where people of different backgrounds live together in peace. You can teach, and I can use my healing knowledge. We will build a life that honors both of our peoples, that shows understanding and love are possible, even when the world says they should not be." "What about your sister?" Eleanor asked as they mounted the horses. "I visited Nayeli last week and told her everything," Tahatan replied with a smile. "She was happy for me, though she cried when we said goodbye. She gave me her blessing and made me promise to write to her when we are settled. She said that my choosing love and freedom gives her hope that such things are possible, even in this difficult world." They rode west together, leaving Prescott and its expectations far behind. The journey would be long and undoubtedly difficult, but they would face it together as equals, as partners, as 2 people who had chosen love over fear, authenticity over obligation, freedom over comfort. Months later, in a small town in Northern California, Eleanor stood in front of a classroom that welcomed children of all backgrounds, white, Mexican, Chinese, and Indian alike. Tahatan worked beside the local doctor, his knowledge of traditional healing methods proving invaluable to the community. They had married in a simple ceremony that honored both of their heritages, and they were building a life that was uniquely their own. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch of their small house, watching the sun set over unfamiliar mountains. Eleanor would sometimes take out the carved hawk, running her fingers over its smooth surface, marveling at how a prayer whispered in the snow had led her to the greatest love of her life. "Do you ever regret it?" Tahatan asked one such evening, his arm around her shoulders. "Leaving behind everything you knew?" Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes full of love and certainty. "Not for a single moment. You saved my life that day in the blizzard, Tahatan, in more ways than one. You showed me what it means to truly live, to choose one's own path regardless of what others expect. I found my purpose, but not where I thought I would. I found it with you, in building a life based on love, respect, and the courage to be exactly who we are." Tahatan kissed the top of her head, his heart full of gratitude and joy. Two souls from different worlds had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and together they had created something beautiful, something that transcended the boundaries their societies had tried to impose. They had chosen each other, and in doing so, they had chosen freedom, love, and a future filled with endless possibility.